Ek gesels steeds met Dr. Audrey Delsink en ons praat oor leeu's wat in aanhouding gehou word. Dr. Delsink, welcome to GROOTplaas once again.
Thank you for having me again.
So, we're talking about lions in captivity. Paint me a big picture. How big or how many of our lions, let's say in South Africa, are in captivity? How's that ratio?
I think many South Africans are unaware that we actually have 4 times as many captive lions than we do lions in the wild. Currently, there are between 10 to 12,000 lions in captivity, which is a phenomenal number of lions.
Yes.
And most of these lions sit in atrocious conditions, far from the natural conditions, far from what their pride conditions are like, and really, really abhorrent conditions that the mind boggles. Many of these situations have resulted in welfare cases being opened and are still ongoing. So it's quite a grim situation for these animals.
What exactly are captive bred lions used for in South Africa?
So the captive lion breeding industry actually has many different facets. Essentially, South Africa is the only country that has a quota with the CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Fauna and Flora. And that quota enables South Africa to breed lions in captivity for the export and trade of lion bones for overseas markets, and also for hunting of lions in captivity. And so lions are bred in captivity for that purpose, but essentially it starts from cradle to grave. So basically the lions are taken from their mothers at just a couple of hours old, and then they're hand raised, often by volunteers that come to Africa and are part of these volunteer programs. They're basically hand raised and are then used in bottle feeding, and then, you know, cub photo opportunities, etc., as selfies and those kind of props. And then they then become walking with lion safaris. So we physically go on walks with these animals with guides. When they are too big and a little bit too dangerous to do that, they go into camps where they then basically waited out. They are either then killed for the lion bone trade, or they are then shot as essentially canned trophies for hunts. So either way, they don't end up with a very positive outcome.
How big is the uproar from, let's say, organizations like you, or the one you're working for? How big is that uproar? I mean, obviously, you guys are fighting for a certain humane treatment of certain animals and animals. So how big is the fight from your side? I mean, what would you like to see and to be done when it comes to lions being held in captivity in South Africa?
So the uproar is huge, and this is a fight that has been ongoing for many, many, many years. The first Lion Task Team was called in 2005 to look at options to actually shut down the industry. And at that stage, there were only a handful of lions, and that was about 2,500 to 3,000 lions. And at that point, it was deemed that the situation was insurmountable. There were too many lions. Well, now in 2023, we're sitting with nearly 12,000 lions. And because the issue wasn't stopped and in the bud then, now the problem is almost insurmountable. And so it's very frustrating that we've gone nowhere, basically. So there are many, many organizations that are calling on the government and on the world to stop, you know, exploiting these lions in this manner. And really, time has come now, and we have to end this abhorrent industry. And so our organization, together with others such as Blood Lions, have taken the lead in calling an end for this industry. the Minister of Environmental Affairs, Minister Barbara Creasy, did commit to closing this captive lion breeding industry in 2021 after there were supporting recommendations by the high-level panel on the management, breeding, hunting, trade and handling of elephant, lion and leopard and rhinoceros. But in fact, in 2018, there was a parliamentary colloquium that suggested that the industry must actually be stopped. There is currently a ministerial task team that is looking to identify and recommend voluntary exit options and pathways from the captive lion industry. And this has been extended to December 2023. Obviously, we need to wait and see what the outcomes of this are. But in our opinion, talk is cheap. The message is clear. This was called for an end way back in 2018. And so it's time. This industry needs to be shut down once and for all.
When we look at this extension to December, like you've just mentioned, what does that mean in practice? I mean, what does this extension mean? What is the call for people who are involved in canned lion hunting? What should they do? Or what opportunity do they have now?
Well, the extension is to allow other members within the industry to actually approach and voluntary exit the industry of their own accord. Apparently, there is some conditionality with that, although it's very limited. But apparently, only a few members have actually stepped up to the plate. So the extension is to allow further engagement with the industry players, to allow further uptake. Obviously, these discussions are confidential. Organizations such as ourselves have been participating and contributing. We don't know the full extent of those other details. And there have only been one or two updates by the panel members themselves. So we look and wait to see, how things have developed. By no means is it a small undertaking. They had to do a full audit of the facilities and the numbers, etc., which in our view was too little, too late. Those are information that should have been had right from the onset because the problem is so enormous. And so those are options that should have been done way beforehand so that we know what you're dealing with, so that we can have good practical solutions that make sense to all.
Dr. Delsink, what do you think is the perception, the public perception, when it comes to lions being held in captivity?
So we actually undertook an independent survey of South Africans specifically. It was conducted by Ipsos, and we have done a number of these surveys, actually 3. Our latest survey in 2022 indicated that South Africans are not supportive of the industry whatsoever. And in fact, 65% of South Africans, that is the majority, actually oppose the practice of canned lion hunting and captive lion breeding. So that is quite a phenomenal number. And I must add that the survey was done across all demographics and all races and across South Africa as a whole. It was done also across all income streams. So it's a very telling representation of our country. And they were in agreement that this certainly does pose a very damaging reputation for South Africa, which is deemed by some to be, a world leader in conservation. So the message is very clear. South Africans do not support this industry and do want to see an end to it.
You mentioned earlier about the daily lives, or from cradle to grave, you mentioned, of lions being kept in captivity. And so do you think, you also mentioned that there's a lot of rescue missions. Are we doing enough to create safe spaces for rescued animals that are rescued out of situations like you have mentioned?
I think we need to be very clear in that we need to differentiate between our captive lions and our wild lions. And so, worldwide, there are a number of situations where lions live in horrific circumstances, where they have been exploited. And so there are certainly need for those types of lions, and so sanctuaries do exist. The challenges that our wild lions face is habitat space and availability. I think it must be known that wild lions are very capable of breeding. And so within South Africa, the challenge that we have is not that they are not able to breed. In fact, most South African reserves have to undertake some kind of population management for those wild lions because they breed very well. And in fact, they need to curb their population growth. So that is not a challenge. And so we do not need captive bred lions to supplement our wild populations. That is not a need for which captive lions have been created or manifested. So that is a myth that needs to be busted right now. Also, while, captive lions cannot fill that niche because there are a number of zoonotic diseases that they carry, genetic concerns, can they actually survive in the wild to second-generation breeding, etc. So there's a whole bunch of concerns. There's no peer-reviewed study that actually demonstrates that captive-bred lions can actually survive with other prides, and so that is an issue. So there are needs for certain sanctuaries for those types of lions. But I think, the elephant is in the room is what is going to happen with all these lions in captivity as we now see them. And so that is why, as I mentioned earlier, the audit is so important so that we can assess, what the ages of those lions are, what their health conditions are, etc., because many are not well. Some may need to be euthanized because of health conditions, etc. Once we have that information, then hard decisions need to be made about the future of those lions. But these are lions that were bred to be killed in one form or another, and people mustn't lose sight of that.
We've got about a minute left. I just quickly want to hear from you. If you could flick your fingers and change the situation completely, what would you like to be done as an immediate solution on the topic?
If I could have my way and we could flick our fingers, I would love that, the calls to action that we made a number of years ago were taken, and that would be an immediate moratorium on the breeding of these lions in these facilities, because then there would be a natural die-off of these lions in these facilities, as well as a moratorium on the permitting of new facilities, because we've just perpetuated the problem. We haven't stopped the problem. I think those would be the quick fix solutions to stop perpetuating the issue. And I think also an awareness of what we are facilitating and creating. We need to stop interactions with big cats. And this is not just lions. We also have a big problem with tigers. There are so many captive tigers, which is regarded as an exotic in South Africa, and so there are no laws basically to channel the control of tigers. And
Dr. Audrey, we're going to have to continue our chat on a different time. But thank you so much for your knowledge and your passion. I really appreciate it. Dankie dat jy ingeskakel het vandag. Ek hoop jy het 'n goeie dag wat voorlê. Bly net waar jy is. Die Groot Ontbytspan groet jou om 6:00 en ek en jy sien mekaar natuurlik môreoggend weer. Totsiens.